we were in Nehemiah 9. It felt real, man, if I was a comedian, I think I would have gotten booed to death. It felt like a lot of people just staring at me. So I did the best I could. And it's really, I mean, I'll be honest, I went into this chapter today kind of like I went into having a yard sale yesterday. It's like, here we go. And it wasn't that I had like low expectations. It was just, it's a really long chapter, and I can see in a way what's going on there, and yet I felt like I was having a difficult time just preparing a message out of it, other than say, repent and seek revival, get rid of religion, and but I think if I just said that and said, okay, now go home, that's just kind of you came for a little bit more than that. And so we just kind of dug in a little bit. But tell me if there's something I missed in that scripture. If you read through it, and Matt, you read it, right? Did you get to here? Do you remember anything? But I mean, of course, I don't have it here with me. My Bible that I use up at the platform, I had all kinds of stuff underlined in there. Yeah.
The last stuff that you read.
Uh-huh.
Why didn't God eventually let them have their own, because, where all their harvest went to the king?
Oh, yeah.
So,
the foreign king, really.
Yeah, why did he send them back to only more slavery in the long run? Because they were probably free people, but yet they were slaves to the king still. And
they were still ruled by the empire in that way, and so they still had to pay, they had to pay what was levied upon them. And over the following centuries between then and Christ's time, they had a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Jewish history in those days that isn't recorded in our scriptures. Some of it's recorded in the Catholic Bible, with the apocryphal scriptures, and some of it's just recorded in historical accounts outside of those scriptures. There's a lot that went on, back and forth with them fighting for freedom and then not having it, and vice, back and forth. But it's interesting that seemed to be the thing that was really close to all their hearts, especially in the time of Christ. They wanted that freedom fighter Messiah. They wanted freedom from Rome, but that wasn't the thing that God was concerned with. And maybe that should inform us a little bit in our desires and in our prayers. We're looking for the provisions of God. We're looking for the hand of God, and not the freedom from slavery to sin and wickedness that He offers us. I heard a preacher say, and I'll quote him on the surface. You're going to be like, oh, don't say that, and then you're like, no, he's right. And this preacher said, he's like, I wasn't going to say this, but now I decided to. He said, it's hard to give God the finger and then ask for His hand. Meaning, like, I don't want to be close to you all the time, kind of throw up a bird at him, but then say, oh, and then we come to him with our hand out and say, give me. It's like, wait a second, you didn't want me around you earlier, you didn't want to be with me, but now all of a sudden you want stuff from me. I mean, there's a whole bunch of areas in life where people can get that way. Think of a kid that teenage years hit, and they didn't ever want to hang out with you anymore because you're old and uncool. But boy, they like to borrow the car and get a tank of gas off of you, or whatever it is. Those type of things. That's how we treat God. And that's how, that was their expectation of God off and on quite a bit. God, take care of us. God, bless us in the promised land. You said you would do these things. You said you would take care of us. You said you would bless us. See, I can point to it in the words of Moses. You promised it, God. You brought us back from exile. You're going to do these things, God.
You got to do your part.
But but they don't want to be close to God at all. And so we do the same thing. We're like, God, I was in church and I prayed for healing, or I prayed for provision, I prayed for my marriage, I prayed for my children, I prayed for this and that. And God's like, yeah, and then the rest of your week, you did everything you wanted to do, didn't even talk to me. You acted like I didn't exist.
Didn't think about me.
The only time you think about me is when you got your hand out. Now, the nice thing is God's a God of unconditional love, and he still loves you anyway. But it's kind of like, why would I even do that? Why would I continue blessing you? Because you're going to think that that's all our relationship is a transactional thing. It's a transaction. I pray, God blesses. I ask, he gives. You're going to think that's all there is to God. You're going to think it's just religion. I follow the rules. God has to bless me. Anybody remember that prayer of Jabez? Yeah, exactly. That prayer of Jabez booklet from like the 90s. Anybody remember that? Oh, you guys are lucky. There's a verse in the Bible, in Chronicles, I think, I forget where. There's this guy named Jabez or Jabez, and there's one verse about him, and it simply says, he prayed, "Oh Lord, enlarge my territories, keep me from pain so that I might not sin," whatever, just a few things like that. It says, and God answered his prayer. Oh, okay. So the guy, enlarge my territories means give me more wealth. But he also said so that he could bless others with it. So it's like, okay, God did answer that prayer because it was a noble prayer. Give me more so that I can bless more people. Like, I'll be faithful with what you give me, so give me more and I'll be a bigger blessing to others. Okay, cool. He says, keep me from suffering so that I might not cause pain to others. Okay, cool. Seems noble. The problem is somebody picked up on that one verse, wrote a little, 30 or 40 page little book with just a couple paragraphs on every page. And he basically said, there's a prayer that you can pray that God has to answer. He must answer every time. Oh, what? Just like you can just force God to do it, basically? No, I don't think so. That's actually religion. Religion says, if I do this, God has to do this. If I fulfill the commandments and the covenant as an Israelite, if I fulfill the law of Moses, then God has to bless me in the land of promise. He has to take care of me. No, he doesn't. Now, he said he will, but the rest of it is, you're not going to fulfill it perfectly. You're not going to keep the law perfectly. And so that's kind of the struggle there, is we keep thinking, if I just do this, then God will be happy with me and God will bless me. And that's weak religion. It's faulty. It's gross.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Okay, when the Israelites came back the first time, or the second, how did they get their land back? I mean, it doesn't say much in there about, okay, the family of this has this plot over here because they had land before they left. Do they have the same land when they get back?
Yeah, so they did keep good records of that, and they kept good family records too. I don't believe there were enough people, from what I understood in my studies, I don't believe there were enough people living in the land that they would have maintained all of it. So probably a lot of it just, the fields grew up, all this stuff. And so that is an intriguing idea, if you come to land that formerly was yours, but you can hardly even tell the boundaries of it anymore after, 70 years of letting it grow wild and unkept. Also, though, remember, the Assyrian kings had moved in the land of Israel. They had moved in neighboring peoples that later became what we knew as the Samaritans. Those people moved in from another conquered nation. I don't think it actually tells us where, but the king moves them in after moving Israelites out. He moves foreigners in. There's still some Israelites there. They intermarry with them, and they blend their worship practices. So their false gods, they didn't even start to blend them. They just brought their false gods with them. And then God starts allowing a lot of bad things to happen to them. And so they said, oh, there must be a local deity that's not too happy about this. So they talk to the king and say, can you send back some of the priests of the land so that they can teach us how to worship the local God? That's the way they believed in it. So the priests, the Israelite priests, they send a few of them back. They teach them the ways of God. And so the Samaritans kind of do that, but they still worship their false god. So by the time you see Jesus talking with the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4, he's talking with her, and she says, well, we've got this disparagement between the Jews and the Gentiles. You Jews say we've got to go worship at the temple in Jerusalem. We've been worshiping for a few centuries on Mount Gerizim, and we built a temple there, and we think that's a good enough place to connect with God. They'd learned some of the prophets. She understood. She knew the words of the prophets, and she told Jesus, like, once he recognized stuff about her life, she said, I can tell you're a prophet, like the prophets have also told us that there's one coming, a Messiah coming, and he'll declare everything to us plainly. He says, woman, I tell you, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Like, in other words, I'm the guy. And she's like, wow. She runs off and gets everyone from the village and brings them to meet Jesus. So anyway, we know that there were people that had moved into the land. To get to the meat of your question, there were people that had moved into the land. They had settled there. They had intermingled Jewish culture and religion with theirs. That's why especially the Pharisees and most of the people in Judea didn't like the Samaritans, was because they were like, after exile, we recognize that we need to obey God's law. And these people aren't doing it very well. And it was because we had intermingled and intermarried, and we're going to see that in the next few chapters in Nehemiah, where they start marrying foreigners after they've come back from exile, and they're punished for it. And so they look at the Samaritans and say, okay, you guys were doing everything that led us to exile and out of the blessing of God. We need to avoid all that. So I imagine what had happened was the area that became known as Samaria was where they kind of corralled all those foreigners or interbred people into that area. But then they begin over time. Of course, they settled in Jerusalem, built the walls, built the temple, built the walls. And we'll see in chapter 11 is where they actually have a lottery for people to move into the city, because they were living outside in neighboring towns and villages. So most of the people that came to build the wall were actually outsiders to the city. They showed up to build it. Some of them lived in the city for sure, because it talks about their businesses there and things like that. But probably there were a lot of people slowly moving back to their familial lands and laying claim to it. Now, whether they had to pay off somebody that had been working it, if somebody was, or whether maybe those were their relatives, I'm not too certain on all that. But they had the records of saying, this was my family's land, so it's now mine. And I'm guessing part of the edict of the king allowed them to legally take control or ownership of their familial lands again. So I'm not sure if that caused some turmoil.
So they just pushed the other ones out?
Well, I'm not sure if there's anybody even living on it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know that. But when you read in Haggai, the prophet, I don't know what chapter, he accuses the people of, now he was one of those post-exile prophets, but actually just a little bit before Ezra and Nehemiah, when some of the people had first moved back, he says, you guys are living in paneled houses, but the house of the Lord is in ruins. Like, you've built your homes and paneled them, you've made nice homes, but there's no temple. So when are you going to build God's house? And they were saying, well, it's not time to build God's house. We're still rebuilding civilization here. And the prophet Haggai says, no, the time is now for you to get together and build God's house. And so he kind of spurs them on to do that. So it's really interesting, just the whole exile and post-exile life and rebuilding that's going on. I've been studying a lot of that, not just Ezra and Nehemiah, but like the book of Esther is what's going on in the citadel of Susa within the Persian kingdom. is kind of showing what's going on there for the people that are living in exile. They're doing fairly well, but they get targeted for destruction by Haman. You've got Daniel that's living through multiple of the empires. Like he gets carted out as one of the early Jewish exiles, but then stays through for multiple different kingdoms and serves those kings. And he never, as far as I can remember, never goes back to Israel. He stays in exile his whole life. But Daniel's happening during the exilic period. Who else? And then just the prophets that were writing during that time. It's really interesting to see the world that was going on. So I'm still kind of learning a lot of what life on the ground looked like, but it's really fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, it started when the original in Exodus, when the Jewish people did not do what they were instructed to
Right.
do when they first entered.
Yeah.
They left the
Yeah.
pagan practices there, they intermingled, they intermarried, and they were punished from that point on
Yeah.
until they eventually got to the Exodus. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we're slow learners.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We tend to make the same mistake over and over and over. We don't learn from our mistakes.
I mean, look at like 9:16. Our forefathers became arrogant and stiff-necked and did not obey your commands. They refused to listen and failed to remember the miracles you performed among them. They became stiff-necked in their rebellion, appointed a leader to return to their slavery. In other words, when they got a king over them, what they're saying is it was like returning to slavery again. We are now enslaved to a king. But it says, but you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Therefore you did not desert them, even when they cast for themselves an image of a calf and said, this is your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Or when they committed awful blasphemies. And so, they recognize it. I mean, from day one, that's how they were. I mean, they're just talking about being in the desert in the wilderness. They're like, you had plenty of time to abandon us because of what we did. And yet, you stayed with us, God. And so they recognize that. And then, they continue confessing their own sins. It's interesting to me how much they also confessed, their ancestors' sins, not just glossing over it, but adopting them as saying, this is what our ancestors did, but we are the offspring of our ancestors. So, really, this is our sin as well. They adopt that sin upon themselves, essentially. Anything else? Looking ahead to chapter 10 is interesting, and forget reading all those names. I can do it, but I don't need to. But they have, they write this contract or covenant, and it's funny to me because they already had a covenant. They're still under the Mosaic covenant, but they're kind of writing it's almost like a summary of it. It's like they summarize the whole Mosaic law as it directly applies to their life. And they say, like, we won't give our daughters in marriage to foreigners and take their daughters for our sons. When people from outside of our land bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, we won't buy it from them on the Sabbath or on any holy day. On every seventh year, we'll forego the working the land and cancel all debts. This is around verse 32, by the way. We'll bring basically there was a amount of money they were supposed to bring for the service of the house of God, for the temple, a third of a shekel each year. Offerings for setting the holy showbread out on the table, grain offerings, burnt offerings, Sabbaths, new moon festivals, feasts, holy offerings. They're like, we're going to do all these things. They basically commit to saying, we're going to follow all these laws of worship and of caring for the house of God and for those who serve in it, because they talk about the priests and the Levites and the provisions for them, bringing stuff into the storerooms of the house of God, and collecting the tithes, doing all these different things. And then their last line is, we will not neglect the house of our God. So part of the cycle that's been going on, and kind of what you were talking about, Keith, early on, they broke his rules, his laws. But part of what's happening here, I think, with the revival that started in chapter 9, is they bind themselves to God's law in chapter 10, and they say, we're going to do this. Which is kind of like, are you? Because it was back in Joshua where he said, okay, guys, choose this day whom you will serve. Are you going to serve idols or are you going to serve God? As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And he said, put away your foreign gods. What? They shouldn't have had any. Like, it should have already been happened that they're gone. And so from the very get-go, idolatry was a problem. And it continued to be a problem for them all throughout this. But fast forwarding from this point on, and I'm sure they had a lot of missteps along the way, what becomes birthed out of the post-exilic period is the Pharisees. Pharisees start out well-intentioned. This kind of law, like, we're going to make sure we maintain our faithfulness to God's law. We're going to do these things. We're binding ourselves to an agreement, to a covenant, to do that. But everybody looks at any set of rules and says, but can I get away with it? Last week, 2 weeks ago, I was driving a truck through Kentucky and I got pulled over for being in the wrong lane. There were 3 lanes. There was a stack of semi-trucks in both the right and the center lane. And I'm in a box truck. And there's a cop on the shoulder. And so everybody wants to get over. So I got over. And immediately what happens is other trucks from the right lane get over to the center lane. And now it's squished full of trucks. So I can't really get back over without really ticking somebody off. So I'm just going to ride out that left lane for a while. I can see a gap up ahead. And I'm going to get up there. There's nobody behind me. I'm not slowing anybody down. I was actually moving at like 75 miles an hour in this little truck. It was scooting pretty good. Well, just as we're getting up by where the cop is, where I'm at, he's done with his customer. And he takes off up the shoulder, pulls in front of a couple trucks, works his way over to the left lane. So now he's in front of me. And meanwhile, I'm like looking for my spot to get back over. And this cop pulls into the left where there's on the shoulder where there's these orange barrels, construction barrels. So now I've got to like hit the brakes and kind of squeeze around him. And so finally I get back over, and then he pulls in behind me and he pulls me over and he tells me there's signs everywhere that says trucks use right 2 lanes. And I didn't want to say, yeah, I got over because of you, idiot, but like I didn't want to say that. But I was kind of thinking like, okay, but it doesn't say no trucks in left lane, or there's some states you go through where it says no trucks in the left lane. This one just says trucks use right 2 lanes. To me, that seems like use them. If you really got to, use the other lane too. It doesn't say I can't. See, that's the loophole in my mind. And for him, he says it's pretty clearly marked. By the way, he didn't give me a ticket for that. He gave me a $25 inspection fee and then court costs of $142.
Oh,
Ooh.
Yeah. I like working for half price. Anyway, knock out the money on me. They're trying, the company's trying to fight it for me. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I said all that to say, I could see the signs. I saw the signs. In my mind, it didn't forbid me from being in the left lane. I can be in the left lane. Some states it says trucks over 6 wheels, no left lane. My truck has 6 wheels, not 10 or 18, so I should be okay. Trucks rated over 26,000 pounds or 13 tons, that's CDL and above. My truck doesn't need a CDL, it's under 26,000 pounds. I should be able to travel in the left lane. But Kentucky, likes to be vague about their stupid road signs.
That's so they can get more money on tickets.
I would have been in that left lane if it wasn't for
I
that
know.
cop anyway.
I know I-75, you see a whole bunch of semis.
Yeah. It doesn't say you can.
Yep.
Anyway, so it was a part of Kentucky where there's always a ton of cops, and I should have known to be on my bestest behavior, and I kind of was, except for that. But the point is, I'm thinking there's a loophole in the law, or wiggle room in what it means. So what do we need? I would have actually preferred it to say, no trucks in the left lane. That makes more sense to me. I want it to be spelled out so that I know exactly what I can and can't do. Pharisees wanted the laws spelled out. So when the law doesn't spell it out, and you're like, well, but can I do this much, but not that? Well, don't work on the Sabbath. Well, what if my friend borrowed my power saw and I just wanted to go get it back because I know I'm going to use it tomorrow morning after the Sabbath's over? Can I go get my saw from him? Well, you're carrying a tool, aren't you? So you can't carry a tool. Oh. Well, what if I want to go walk and see my friend? It's a Sabbath day. I'm not working. I want to just go walk to him. How far away do they live? Because if it's 2 miles, that's a long walk. That feels too far. If they live 2 blocks away, that's okay. That's not exercise. That's not laborious. Well, for some of us it might be, but you get what I'm saying. So now we have to define how far can you walk on the Sabbath? You know, how much is work and how much is fun? My grandparents wouldn't go hunting or fishing on the Sabbath, on Sunday. Why? Well, it's easy to sit on a stump, hold a rifle in your lap, and look around and enjoy nature. But what if you actually shoot a deer or a rabbit or whatever you're hunting? Oh, now you've got to dress it, hang it up, all this stuff. Now you're working. I don't see it that way. I also wasn't a good hunter, so there was less concern that I would actually shoot something. I just didn't see why I had to sit around the cabin on Sunday. And part of me rejects their theory. Sitting in a boat or on a dock fishing doesn't seem like work, even if you catch a fish. That's fun, Then you got to clean it and prep it and put it on ice or put it in the fridge. Oh, okay. What if you say, I'm going to go home and invite some people over. I got to cook a meal for them. Now I got to set the table. I got to put on all this stuff, cook all these sides. I've watched women scurrying around putting a meal out for Sunday dinner for people. Easter, going over to my wife's grandparents, back a few years back, and watching Nana trying to remember every dish because she had all the same stuff every year. Seemed like it's working. Like it's work. And so that's why Pharisees come in and say, is that work? You should have prepared all that last night. They weren't allowed to light a flame on the Sabbath day. So if you wanted a lamp, Sabbath morning, you better light it Sabbath the night before. Better add oil to it the night before so that it can burn through to the next morning. So now modern Jews are like, can I turn on a light switch? Because that's the modern equivalent of lighting a lamp. Is that work? Some of them say yes. What do? You put the switch on a timer. So now they make timers just for Jewish observant people, that'll turn their lights on at the right time. Of course, now you can set them up with a home device, a Google Home or Alexa or whatever, home kits. You can set it all up where your lights are Wi-Fi controlled through this device, and you can set up a timer and customize it. Well, then what if you want to turn it on or off and you say, hey, Alexa, turn on my living room lights? Is that work? So Phariseeism, religious observance, always demands a continual updating of the loopholes in the law. And it's so easy to get lost in all that religion of saying, I have to do this, I can't do that, I must do these things, I must avoid those things. And in the middle of it, it's like, have you even communed with God? Have you connected with God in all of that? Probably not. It's so easy to get caught up in those things. Now Sabbath is like, okay, what one person might call work, another person might call, this is my time with God. There's times where I put headphones on and, listen to some it might have been scripture or a book or whatever, where it's like, I felt like I had more time with God doing that while I was riding a lawnmower around or a tractor or something, than if I didn't. Is that good or bad? I don't know. To me, it's like if you get out there and you're like, I have to do this thing, that seems like it's work. That seems like it's religion. If you say, I want to do this, now you're getting into the right place. This is something I meant to say earlier and didn't. Ought to and shoulds is the killer of true relationship with God. Oh, I ought to do this thing. I should do this thing. Have you ever had that list of ought tos? I ought to do this, or I have to do this. I should do that. Something I ought to call this person, check in on them. Do you want to, or you ought to? Ought to is just a list of stuff to get caught up in. Got to get to the place where you want to. I really should read my Bible every day. Well, yeah, you should. But until you get to the place where you want to, because you've actually met God in His Word, it won't really mean anything to you. I really should be in church every week. Maybe. But if your should attend church just means all you do is you get entrenched in a cycle of going without actually getting to know God, it doesn't matter. Don't come. Spend time. Don't, if you can't leave your house wanting to meet with God at church, spend some time in prayer before you ever leave. I know, what pastor tells their people to stay home from church? Anyway, you get what I'm saying, though. All right, I'm done with my rambling.
That goes back to preaching to the choir concept.
Yeah.
If you say that, but the people who come out of habit
Yeah.
still will gain something.
Hope so.
If they stay home, they won't gain anything.
That's true.
So
and I don't
there
really
is an
mean-
advantage.
I don't really mean stay home, but what I'm trying to say is, you're people can get religious for so long that it ends up inoculating them from really having a connection with God, because they convince themselves that they're like we see in chapter 10, what they're going to say, their religious observance is so on point, is so, they got 100% on it. Like the guy that talked with Jesus, and he's like, what do I have to do to be saved? And he's like, follow these commands. He's like, oh, I've done those since I was a boy. What's still lacking? It's like, well, there's really something that is lacking. There's this problem in your heart. For you, it's your wealth. Get rid of your wealth, because that's got a hold of your heart, and now your heart can get a hold of God. And that's the kind of thing I think that we still have the danger of the most. We're not building idols or images, like they used to. We just have these idols that we still bow down to in our lives, and or that we still devote ourselves to. And so that's what's going on. And get rid of the idols if you want to meet God, have a real connection with God.
Next Sunday, Mom and I won't be here.